in not remedying every little fear and concern that children have, we give children a chance to learn on their own.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I'm your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. Tim Cavell approached me at the World Anti-Bullying Forum and claimed that his book on parenting and my book on parenting have some things in common. But he was just being generous. Tim is the co-author of Good Enough Parenting, a 6-point plan for a stronger relationship with your child, published by the American Psychological Association. It is a great book, and I am just happy that he agreed to share some of the insights from it here. This podcast is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign, through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. And now, the interview.
I was in a master's program years ago and had an interest in working with adolescents, and but I didn't have an opportunity to do that until I went to my doctoral program. And in my doctoral program, I did research involving adolescents primarily. And my advisor was doing some work on the area of working with parents of difficult children. And that particular approach didn't hold much appeal to me. So I kind of bided my time. But then when I went on internship in Portland, Oregon, I had an opportunity to do a kind of a parenting approach that really emphasized the things that I thought was important. And I witnessed firsthand how you can change the relationship by which parents interact with children and for the better. And that made quite an impression on me. So when I started my first academic job at Texas A&M, I set about trying to evaluate an approach that combined behavioral parent training, which was more of the science of the time, with an approach that was called filial therapy or child relationship enhancement therapy, and which involved teaching parents basically the skills of a professional child play therapist. Now there are other variations on that, but the particular approach that I tried to integrate eventually emerged into the book Working with Parents of Aggressive Children, which was published in 2000. So fast forward to 2023, there's now the second edition of that book. And then along with that is a parent volume, a companion volume, if you will, that parents can use on its own or if they're working with a professional. And both of them have a similar conceptual frame. Both of them construe parenting as first and foremost a relationship. It's less about managing behavior, particularly managing behavior in the short run. It's about managing a relationship over time.
And then you and Lauren Quetch wrote a book, Good Enough Parenting, a 6-point plan for a stronger relationship with your child. What was the seed of that book?
Interesting. Because the book actually began in some ways several years earlier when I was approached and asked to write a book called You're Not the Worst Parent in the World. And I thought, that's a pretty cool title. I can get behind that.
Yeah.
So I actually wrote the book, and then the economy went south, and so the book was canceled. It was never got published, and so the idea of that book just kind of sat. And then when I wrote the second edition of the practitioner book, I invited Lauren to come on as a co-author, and also to come on as a co-author on a parenting version of the book. And she did a great job of moving that forward and bringing the perspective of someone who's a mother a mother of young kids, as a researcher who does work in the autism space, helping parents of kids with
Right.
autism. So I thought we were a pretty good team, and we got both books done.
And you and I had connected at the World Anti-Bullying Forum because you pointed out that my book on parenting has a number in the title, The Five Simple Truths of Raising Kids. Yours has a 6-point plan. You also bring in a 4 R's. So you bring in another number in your book. And you quickly discerned that there are places where we overlapped. Having now taken a look at your book, I see I'm grateful for the overlap, and I'm embarrassed about the things that I let out because I think that there are some things that you hit on that I think are really, really important. I want to talk. Let's start with the idea that you have to begin with a goal for parenting, and this is really important, I think, because listeners of Talking About Kids will know that we've talked about this just recently in an episode where we looked at a book from 1950 on parenting. And it started the same way. It started with you have to know what your goals are as a parent. Let's talk about the importance of setting those goals and what are the right kind of goals, Tim?
I'm curious about the book. Was that parent and child?
No, it was, it's called How to Live with Children.
Uh,
And it was put out by I hope I get this right, the Child Family Institute out of Chicago. And I love
okay,
the title,
okay,
How to Live with Children. Like, the only other books I'd seen with a similar title was something like, How to Live with Cancer. It was something where you were trying to live with something that was
right,
obviously a burden. So the How to Live with Children, that
right,
really
right,
made me curious. But anyway, so
right,
the goals. Why are goals important to
right.
parents? Why should we set them? And then, do you have any advice for the kinds of goals that we should be setting?
Sure. Thank you. That's a good question. Um, so the science of goal setting is pretty robust and consistent. That we as human beings benefit when we set clear, specific goals. Think about what goals do for us. They organize our behavior. I'm a practicing therapist, so I practice one day a week when I'm not at the university teaching and researching. And in the work that I do as a therapist, I think so much of what benefits my patients is that we provide goals for them, science-based goals that people can't on their own discern. For example, if someone's having trouble with panic, the intuitive response is to run as far away and as fast as you can from panic. It turns out that that's not a workable goal. The science of panic tells us you want to lean into those experiences and make room, sort of psychological, emotional room for the threat of panic. Okay. Well, it's hard for an individual on their own to know that that's a proper goal. So goals serve us so well, and the science of parenting can inform us in service. Now, goals, as we talked about, parenting goals are not the goals parents have for children and children's future. They're goals surrounding the specific actions parents take in their interactions and relationship with their children. So I think the answer to the question is that uh, what kind of relationship do you want for your child? What kind of relationship will help your child develop into a healthy, law-abiding citizen? And so we have identified, based on the science of parenting, things like being accepting, conveying a message of belonging and support for autonomy. So there's some aspects about parenting that involve setting those goals. What does that mean for how I interact if that's something I want to achieve? Uh, Setting limits. What are my goals
Right.
surrounding discipline? What are my goals around what kind of example I want to set, or what kind of beliefs or values I want to convey to my children? So there's a number of things that can be deliberately and consciously pursued as parents. The other side of goals in the context of parenting is that so much of parenting is done in an emotion driven way. And so the science of has also told us that when we act impulsively by virtue of emotions, there are goals embedded in those actions. They're not always apparent to us, but if we act out of frustration or anger or disappointment, then sometimes we are pursuing a goal, usually of escaping from that emotional discomfort. And we try to help parents recognize, see the hidden goals in your emotion-driven parenting.
Hmm.
Recognize the threats that come from those hidden goals.
Well, and when you talk about those core supports to the parent child relationship, and so you lay them out as goals are one of them. The other is that you lay out is health. And then you also talk about structure. And of course, I see those as all, intertwined. So when you talk about that emotional parenting, there's a chance that you aren't as healthy or regulated as you could be, right? So let's talk about, so we know now that goals are a good support. What's the role of health? And again, this is something that isn't in my book, and it should have been. So let's talk about that a little bit.
All right. I like the way you asked that question. So, what you described, goals, health, and structure, I see those as the infrastructure, the undergirding, the things that allow a relationship between a parent and a child to go well and to go well for a number of years. And I would say that's true for all of our relationships. If we can't
Yeah,
manage our health, if we don't have a clear understanding of what a good relationship is to set good goals, if we lack a certain level of structure in our life, our relationships will suffer. Well, the same holds
right.
true for parenting. Okay. So, the health of the parent, particularly the emotional health of the parent, has been shown to be such an important contributor to disruptive parenting, to parenting that is overly
Yeah,
harsh or that is unduly lax and permissive. And structure, family structure, again, the four R's, roles, routines, rituals, and rules, I see those as sort of codifying good parenting. So you don't wake up each day and have to invent all over again what's it going to look like for me to
right,
parent well. You've
right,
instantiated it, you've instituted it into your routine so that and the benefit for children is that you've got the security of knowing what's going to happen. That's such a benefit to children to know that there's a
yeah,
predictable routine and that they can count on that it's not upheaval and violence and chaos. And that helps
right,
parents sort of in a wise way benefit more efficiently, okay, because you've created a way to operate that involves planning and anticipates what's coming. And so
right,
particularly for excuse me, for rules, because we put an emphasis on rules for sibling conflict and rules for peer interaction, because those are
hmm,
two really important domains. Kids can generate a lot of problematic behavior if the sibling conflict, sibling rivalry interactions are not managed well. And the same thing later on when kids start to interact with peers. You're interacting with the wrong set of peers, you could launch a trajectory of problem behavior that's not good. And so it's good to have rules for around sibling interaction and peer interaction.
Well, I mean, rules is a place where our books overlap again because I think that we both read the research and we know that those rules are so important. And something that I like to point out is because I hear from parents that they want their child to have creativity, they want their child to be able to explore, and there is this kind of contradiction in what we know about child and parent relationships, which are that structure is freeing for the child. And that's kind of that, it seems paradoxical, but when a child knows what the limits are, they're more likely to explore within the limits, as opposed to a child that doesn't know where the boundaries are. And it's almost like being in a blindfold near a cliff, right? If you don't know where that cliff is and you're blindfolded, you're not going to move because you're going to be afraid of going off that cliff, right? So,
Right.
do you get pushback from parents when you tell them that structure is important to their child's freedom and creativity?
I don't think I do because usually when I'm interacting with parents that are seeking my help, they are looking for something to make life better for them and their children. So now, if I were to approach parents more randomly, they may find that whatever system they have is operating well, and they may not want to overstructure. Okay,
Right.
but for a parent who's trying to find a way to parent that reduces cost to the family for disruptive behavior, then they may be more open to structure. But I think you said it right that there's a real comfort and there are ripple effects from having good structure in a family. The entire family can benefit, and
Right.
so it's something that I think that um, parents well I think there's value in trying to think about what are the primary essential ingredients for making the day go well, for making conveying the message of the acceptance go well, for enforcing the limits in a routine fashion. So anyway, they're all part and parcel of supporting parenting.
In my book, one of my 5 truths is that kids need parents. And you start to address this in one of your 4 R's, which has to do with roles that people have in the household. Um, let's talk about the importance of knowing your role and accepting your role in the family.
Yeah, 2 points about that. One is that there's pretty good research showing that children can suffer when parents carelessly and periodically cross the generational boundary, when they basically deputize, if you will, children as friends, as sort of co-adults and whatever issues they're having. And we
Yeah.
have in the book, the practitioner book, a list of things that whose business is this? Like, for example, if it's a parent who's unmarried, if that parent has a dating partner, is any of that the child's business? Or financial concerns, or various health concerns. There are certain things that require a firm generational boundary. So that's one of
Yeah.
the key things about roles, is keeping that generational boundary intact. The other is that children look up to adults, and they tend to follow adults that convey an example of health and power. Kind of, and I don't mean
Hmm.
power in a harsh, power assertive way, but just they have the ability to control things, to make executive decisions. And
Hmm.
so I remember years ago I was speaking to some teachers, uh, and I asked, "Is it important how teachers carry themselves?" And
Mm.
heads were nodding, yes, yes. And then I asked, "Well, what does that even mean? And where did you learn how to do that?" And I think there's a recognition that it's become so ingrained in how we interact with children that we forget that it's very important how you carry yourself. What's the example you hope to give your children? And so that's an important part of the role. Be an example worth following. So that connects to the leading part of that relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so. And you started talking about that leading. Yeah. I want to get into that. Because you talk about these 4 elements of the parent-child relationship, and my reading of it, and tell me if I have this wrong here, is that these 4 elements are the tools that you use when you are in situations that require response, right? Where you are actively parenting. And you talk about, you got accepting, containing, or this third one, which is leading, which you just mentioned there. Let's talk first about accept. What is accept?
Yeah. Um, it's a form of positive, so-called positive parenting. And depending on which
Okay.
brand of parenting expert you talk to, positive parenting can mean different things. If you talk to some parent training experts, they'll describe positive parenting as praising, rewarding, reinforcing children for good behavior. If you talk to other experts who follow children over time in a more natural environment, positive parenting is about being warm and sensitive and supporting. Okay, we tend to define positive parenting as uh, basically recognizing that children are going to emerge into an individual that's important for you to love and accept. That we don't dictate, uh, we're not puppeteers who can micromanage every aspect of our children's development. And so it's really important to recognize that it's learning who your children are becoming, who they are, what their tendencies are, and then giving them room to operate and to learn things on their own. That's why we like the term good enough parenting, because
Mm.
Winnicott, who coined that term, recognize that in not remedying every little fear and concern that children have, we give children a chance to learn on their own. And in
Right.
this day and age, with so many helicopter parents, I think we get in the way of children learning on their own. We get in the way of children learning to manage emotions on their own. And so there's this paradox that if we can stand back and do less, we actually give children opportunities to learn more. There's a piece in the book where I talk about the line, "What are you going to do?" Okay,
Mm.
I actually included a little essay about that in the second edition of Dummies for Parenting for Dummies. Excuse me, Parenting for Dummies, and I argue that the line "What are you going to do?" is one of the most important, useful lines in parenting, but it's seldom
Hmm.
used. Think about what's required to use that line. I suspect many parents feel like they would be abdicating their role, their responsibility, if a child came up to the parent, showed some
Hmm.
distress, the parent said, "Oh, you're upset, you're mad or disappointed or whatever," and then said, "What are you going to do?" I can imagine a lot of parents would feel like, "My gosh, that's my job. I should have an answer of what to do." But by asking that question, I think you're helping in a more elegant, better way. It says to the child, "You have the capacity to work this through. I'm here if you need me."
Right. Well, it does that. It also it strengthens resilience because you are actually leaning in to the child's own efficacy, right? This belief that or reinforcement that they are capable. So it's a move towards resilience for sure. And then I know from and again we first met at the World Anti-Bullying Forum. I had been doing some research and talking to some teenagers about why they don't tell their parents when they are being victimized or when they witness bullying behavior. And it's precisely because they don't trust that their parent will say, "What are you going to do?" but rather will launch into some sort of action that they're afraid is going to make the situation worse. Right? So if we set that behavior up as we set that expectation early, then our child trusts us that we are not going to intervene when we're not needed or wanted. So I think that's really powerful.
Well, but
What
it's a
then do you mean
challenge.
by, yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
please?
It's a challenge for parents, for many parents, because emotionally it's uncomfortable to see our children ache and struggle and try to find the path forward. And so if we intervene, it's often in service of our own discomfort. It's also a
Mm,
way to kind of document, prove that we're being a good parent because T. Barry Brazelton, famous Harvard pediatrician from years ago,
yeah.
he talked about the need to read children's cues. But he said so many times parents move into like things like feeding children or overfeeding because it's a way to prove good that you're a good parent. And so parents sometimes engage in behaviors because there is the assumption that that's what good parents do versus managing the relationship in a more adaptive way. So it becomes a challenge for parents to pull back. I wrote there's a fable in the parenting book. I don't know if you've seen that called The Little Raccoon and Standing Tree. And it's about an
Mm.
orphan raccoon who's basically gravitates toward a tree that's simply standing there and reflecting what's going on with her as a way to convey the importance of less is more in being accepting. Because if this little orphan raccoon went to see busy beaver and the brown bear, and they were doing all these things to try to help the little raccoon, but you gravitated back toward the tree where less was more. That was a more accepting sort of space for her to be in. And it's not an easy message to give to parents that less is more when it comes to accepting.
So then let's jump to kind of the other extreme of your what you call the core elements of the parent-child relationship, which is contain, containing. What does contain mean?
Yeah. I could have used discipline. I could have used punishment.
Mm,
There are a lot of other words and terms that people are familiar with. I like the term contain because I don't think parents have a ready answer for what that is in the context of parenting. And I wanted to be
right.
able to use it so it can be defined for them in a way that was perhaps novel and helpful. Okay. I also wanted it to convey the message that it's something that you move to at times. It's not your default mode. Okay. You're
Right.
not always trying to contain things, but it's something that you move to when the situation dictates it, when the behavior of the child dictates it. And the way it's we define it is that it's setting a limit such that the behavior that is problematic, uh, there's less payoff for doing that behavior than for doing some alternative behavior. Now that sounds pretty
Hmm.
technical, but that's the goal of containing. Is that you've got a lot of options about what you do in our home and our family, but that's not one of them. That's going to cost you more than some other appropriate behavior like being nice or being cooperative or asking for something. But if you push or hurt or hit or grab or steal, then those are going to be cost. Okay. And the long term goal is to help children become people whose relationships are not marked by coercion. Children who use
Right.
coercion as a primary influence strategy are at great risk down the road for all kinds of things. And so you're basically saying in our family, we don't allow coercion as the way to communicate. And so if you want to, and so for that reason, we talk about containment as sort of effective discipline that's effective because it's selective, it's limited. Again, and somewhat like less is more in accepting. Selective discipline is effective discipline when you're working with a child that's challenging. You want to reserve those disciplinary conflicts for the things that are really important. And focusing on coercion is one of those. You could instead be a parent who demands respect, demands obedience in all instances, and now you've got a wide swath of things that you're engaging in disciplinary
Right.
conflicts about. And you could be spending a lot of time and energy weighing down the relationship because you're trying to police the child's behavior.
Well, and this overlaps the notion of the containing seems to overlap with your advice about rules as well, right? That you, if I'm not mistaken, you talk about you using rules selectively, and but then of course they become fairly rigid. This is a rule, and it seems to me that like when you approach breaking a rule is sometimes when that triggers the containing behavior in response. Do I have that
Yeah,
right?
good. Yeah, no, that's a great observation. Rules can be very handy, but if there are too many rules, children can feel burdened by them and maybe
Right.
confused. And then the parents are burdened by the fact that they have to enforce all these rules.
Right.
So it's good that those are almost things that you pull off the shelf or you have as standing things for recurring problem situations like sibling conflict, which is can be very
Mm.
frequent, or later on with peers, standing rules about how we're going to interact regarding peer interactions or dating or driving. Or now with social
Right.
media use, it's good to think about rules for that. But it's saying we have a shared agreement about what the expectations are around this behavior that can be frequent, recurring, and at times problematic. But most of parent child interactions don't require those kinds of rules, and I would be very cautious about setting lots of those.
And this is where I presented both accept and contain to come to this kind of the third what you present as a core element of the parent child relationship because I this is the one that I find most fascinating is the notion of leading, right? And you talk about it as this third tool. It exists. It might have elements of both, but it kind of exists between the accept and contain. Talk to me about leading.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's two aspects to it. One is the example parents give,
Right.
okay, and that has to do with modeling. So much of the work we do with parents as interventionists is based on learning theory, but we sort of miss the boat when it comes to helping parents model. We don't introduce the example that you model for your children as something to work on, and that's why
Yeah.
health is so important and structure so important. So be a good example, right? What's the quote attributed to Gandhi? Be the change you want in the world, right?
Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
that's be the change you want in your family, right? So can you do you how do you carry yourself, right? But the part you're referring to has to do with those in between instances where your child is doing something that doesn't require heavy handed discipline, but you're not really thrilled about it either. It doesn't require, you're not going to endorse it and say, yeah, go you. It's something that has, kind of raises your eyebrows, like, I don't know. Could be that a child is teasing his or her sibling, okay, in ways that at one time were funny, but now are starting to hurt that other child's feelings. Okay. And so what does a parent do? Or it could be something, maybe that the child has friends that are a little bit, you're not real convinced that they're the best friends. Or maybe a teenager is dating someone and you're not real sure about their potential dating partner and how upstanding they are. So there's a lot of things that parents can worry about. And it's like, and so you're torn. Do I say something? I'm not sure I want to endorse that, but do I say something? Do I intervene? And the third option is what I call it, the third option, which is, as you said, is kind of halfway between accept and contain, is where you do two things. You basically note what you're seeing. For
Hmm.
example, it could be that, hey, that friend of yours, I see that he smokes cigarettes. Um, and it just occurred to me that that's something that your friend does, and yet we're a family that values health and being healthy, and we don't smoke. And you just stop there. The idea
Right.
is that you're sharing with children your observations, accurate observations, but you're not insisting on any sort of change. And, sometimes I say it this way: let the children do the math on that. Give them room to make a decision about whether they want to have a friend, hang out with a friend who smokes cigarettes. Maybe they do, maybe they need to be cautious about it, but you're not stepping into that space. The hardest thing about using the third option, where you contrast what you observe with the family's values, is stopping at the end with that period, as opposed to keep going and lecturing and trying to come to some assured guarantee on what the outcome is going to be. No, this is leaving the the decision about what happens next in the hands of the child, and that's not easy for
Well,
parents to
and
do.
but it's also not abdication, right? And let's make that clear. If, for example, if we make this a more serious one and we talk and we make it about using narcotics, for example, I know that I see that your friend is using it or something. We're not saying that you don't enforce a rule or get involved if your child is using narcotics. If I'm not mistaken, we both believe that through your presence, through your relationship with the child, you will know. You intervene before it's a problem because you are seeing things in their life and in their behavior that warrant a response, but have not risen yet to the level of containment, and you want to stop it from getting to the level of containment. Am I saying that correctly?
I, I would say you want your child to see the merits of stopping it.
Right.
In the example of something that's not urgent and has carries significant health risk like narcotics. Now, if it crosses over to that, if your teenage daughter is dating someone that's abusive or controlling, or if your child is hanging out with someone who is trying to get them to use narcotics, then you can't, you want to abandon the third option. Then you have to do something else. You have to intervene, and this is going to
Right.
be this is going to be challenging because there's going to be pushback in some of these instances where your child is saying, "I don't want you to intervene. Stay out of it. What are you doing? You're stupid. Whatever." And the challenge there, again, this is another emotional health challenge, is staying engaged and continuing to exert effort, even in the face of your children saying, "That is so stupid. I can't believe you're thinking this, thinking that." And so you want to lead with, this is me trying to do my best as a parent. I'm going to persist in this, persist in my effort, even as I stumble. And again, that I think, exerting an effort, even in the face of pushback from kids, can be beneficial when the costs are as significant as you're talking about. What you don't want to do is give up, is give in, just to try to save to appease the child.
Right.
You wouldn't do that in any relationship, but that's what some people do in other relationships. They'll put up with something completely inappropriate and dissatisfying just for the sake of having a relationship. And those are the relationships that implode because they're unhealthy. So you don't want to
Well,
abandon your values for the sake of just clinging to the relationship.
well, Tim, I want to thank you so much for being on Talking About Kids. I also want to thank you for writing this book. And finally, I want to thank you for suggesting that our books have things in common because I think you did a wonderful job with this. And I'm embarrassed by the things that I failed to address that you did. But thank you so much for coming on Talking About Kids.
Well, you're welcome. You're very gracious, and I appreciate the opportunity.
That was Tim Cavell. For more information about Tim and Good Enough Parenting, please visit talkingaboutkids.com. Our theme song is by The Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans, and the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.